Britain's Balfour Declaration 100 years ago led eventually to the creation of Israel. It is not the only time a European power has shaped borders in the Middle East. So what is the legacy of the West's involvement in the region, particularly when it comes to Palestine? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. That Balfour Declaration, which sought to establish a home for Jewish peoples, led to years of conflict, a carving up of land that's highly contested to this day. And history's shown that peace has hardly ever followed other contentious border deals in the Middle East that have been brokered by European countries. Should they, those Europeans, have left well enough alone?
It laid the foundations for the birth of Israel. The Balfour Declaration was a pledge from Britain to create a Jewish national home in Palestine. For the Zionists, it meant a return to the Promised Land, a safe refuge after years of persecution. For others, it was a remapping of a homeland. And for those that lived there, it was the loss of their land, displacement and occupation, sowing the seeds for decades of conflict.
It is high time that Palestine's right to independence be recognized, and that this tormented country enjoy the blessing of a democratic government.
A legacy of Britain's colonial rule, it was one of several deals brokered by Europe that shaped the Middle East borders, deals that have left an imprint that is still felt today, a region scarred by the actions of a colonial past. The Balfour Declaration formed part of Britain's published mandate for Palestine, which some saw as a thinly veiled form of colonialism, a Western superpower flexing its might to shape a non-Western region. Palestine saw 5 major waves of Jewish immigration, the largest in 1929 to 1939, when the rise of Nazism in Europe saw 250,000 immigrants arrive. After this, Britain placed limitations on further immigration, which continued nonetheless. The Balfour Declaration stated that nothing should be done to prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. But critics of the mandate say Jewish self-rule came at a price, driving out Palestinian Arabs who already called the territory home. The horrors of the Holocaust still haunt the European conscience, and today Western powers continue to support the establishment of Israel.
So when some people suggest we should apologise for this letter, I say absolutely not. We are proud of our pioneering role in the creation of the State of Israel. And as we mark 100 years since Balfour, we look forward to taking that relationship even further.
Some say Balfour set a precedent of interference, an example of Western powers setting off a chain of enduring conflicts for the sake of its own interests, and a legacy of involvement that has left deep scars in a troubled region.
I'm joined at the round table today by the researcher Yasmin Al-Qudri, who specialises in the archaeology and culture of Gaza, indeed has family still living in Gaza. We have with us also the historian and author, Dr. Peter Shambrook, and with us too the executive director of the Zionist Federation, Aryeh Miller. Thank you all very much for coming in. I'm going to go back to what Theresa May said and this meeting last week. Partly sponsored by your group, it was headlined on your website as Britain's broken promises. Tell us what you think those broken promises were.
Well, there are a number of dimensions to it. One is, of course, that the mandate was within the framework of the League of Nations Covenant. The League of Nations Covenant included in Article 22 the responsibility of the mandatory power to bring these territories to self-government. So that was one angle of it. So on the one hand, you had the Balfour Declaration, which in a sense put forward the promise of an establishment of a Jewish state, ultimately. And on the other hand, you had Britain's, in terms of Palestine, Britain's responsibility to lead the Palestinian people to independence. So that was one angle.
Because let's pick out the words that were mentioned in that reporter's package there.
Yes.
It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. That's a broken promise?
That is certainly a broken promise in the sense that the Balfour Declaration was not just integrated into the mandate document. It was the mandate document was the implementation, in reality, of the Balfour Declaration.
And for mandate, can we read colony? It's just another word for...
Well, except that they were not like the British colony in North America. The Jewish colonists or immigrants were not coming from a vastly powerful mother country. So it was a different ballgame.
Ari, let me bring in Ari, if I may, at this particular point. With your Zionist Federation, is that the lesson that you like to teach, that the rights of the Palestinians have been protected, that Israel has honoured all of the commitments that it was supposed to make?
So, I mean, you're putting interesting words into the context of this declaration. The declaration wasn't made by Israel, it was made by the British government.
Yeah. But it led to the
I was
formation
wondering if
eventually.
you've got the rest of that sentence as well.
I have. Or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country.
Absolutely. And post the creation of the State of Israel, post 1947, over 800,000 Jews have been kicked out of Arab lands. So if we're talking about broken promises in terms of the declaration, then we need to look at the Arab countries that ejected their Jews, and we need to look at the Jewish populations of the Arab world, which are minimal at best. Most countries have 0. Some have up to 10 Jews living in them. And we need to look at the Jewish population of a potential future Palestinian state.
But let me ask you this. Let's get down to this particular sentence, and we've read out the remains of it as well. Do you believe that nothing has been done which prejudices the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities?
Within Israel's sovereign territory.
Nothing has been done?
Within Israel's sovereign territory, the United Arab List is one of the biggest parties in the Knesset, in Israel's government. Arab Israelis have full rights. The only difference is that they don't have to serve in the Israeli army. Many choose to, but there's no compulsory service for them. They can go to school alongside their neighbours. They can vote alongside their neighbours. They can go to shops alongside their neighbours. It's a full and flourishing Arab community.
Okay,
and it's one of the only flourishing Arab communities in the Middle East.
Let's bring in Yasmin here, because Ari is suggesting that there's intermingling. Mm-hmm. But if you live in Gaza, it's difficult to get out to mingle, isn't it?
I've never met an Israeli in my life, except for soldiers on the border. So I don't.
So do you recognise that picture that Ari describes?
Not really. And I have friends who live in Israel, and they have very different views. They have very different opinions. They don't have the same equal. They don't have any equal rights to jobs. They don't go to the same schools.
That's not true at all. They do have complete equal rights to jobs.
I know this from friends who have gone through this.
But if we're talking about rights,
I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing. I'm not trying to make an argument.
No,
I'm just saying that.
But all I'm saying is, if we're talking about rights, that is a legal term, and legally they have full rights.
Practically, exactly. Practically, it's not the same.
Would you say that women have no rights to jobs in the UK because there is a discrepancy between male employment and female employment?
But in Israel, it's a completely different context in Israel, because someone's name or religion is an ID, is the qualification that is put forward before anyone's CV or qualifications. It's your name, it's your religion. Whether you're Muslim or Christian, then you're immediately treated as a third-class citizen in Israel. You're immediately deprived of your rights to education, to jobs, and there's a lot of
that's
studies.
Simply not the case.
Okay, I'm going to bring this back to Peter at this particular point, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunity for you to disagree further. They were caused by Emily Thornberry. She's Labour's Foreign Secretary.
Yes.
Yeah, the shadow Foreign Secretary. For an apology to be made.
Did she ask for an apology?
I think she asked for an apology.
Okay.
Certainly mark it in a particular way, and we acknowledge that things needed to change.
Yeah.
Is it a one-sided agreement, this, do you think, what's happened, or has it benefited both parties in any way?
You mean the Balfour Declaration?
Yes. Well, and then what followed?
And then what followed? Well, I think it is important to see where all of this came from. During the mandate, the British certainly, on the whole, fulfilled as much as they could, or began to fulfill, the first clause of the Declaration. But I think it's true to say that most historians, because this is a big debate, it's been going on for 100 years academically, most historians would say that the British administration did neglect the second part of the Declaration about the civil and religious rights of what was called the non-Jewish communities. If you look through the archives, as I've done, I've trawled the archives, it's very clear that Balfour and the War Cabinet deliberately left out the word political in that phrase. And in fact, the Declaration, which was the fruit of 18 months of intensive negotiations between the Zionist organisation, Weizmann and his friends, and the British high officials, for 17 months out of those 18 months, there was no second or third phrase. The second and third phrase about religious and civil rights and protecting the rights of Jews in other countries, they were added on in the final month before the actual declaration was issued, in order basically to counteract and to neutralise Curzon and Montagu's opposition to the declaration. So as far as Weizmann was concerned, it's very clear from his diaries and everything else, Weizmann looked upon this declaration as a kind of the great power had a specific obligation to them. And you have to understand the colonial mindsets of the time, both Weizmann's colonial mindsets, in a sense, European and British colonial mindsets, that the Arab majority in the region were basically insignificant and could be dismissed. So it was in terms of its implementation, it was, I would say, a very one-sided, up to 1939 anyway, it was one-sided.
Before Emily Thornberry contacted us, I think she said it should be marked, not celebrated. Perhaps she didn't demand an apology there, but that was by somebody else who was there. But what she did say, and I'll put this to Arya if I may, is that she questioned Israel's commitment to a two-state solution and saying that Israel is perhaps losing its way, which was a sentiment echoed by the former Foreign Secretary, Lord Owen, David Owen. Where's the evidence of the commitment?
You saw it.
Well, I heard him say it, but I mean, where's the evidence of the commitment?
You saw in that video him say it. So first you need to look at rhetoric. And the rhetoric coming out of Israel at least is pro-peace. The rhetoric coming out of the Palestinian Authority is not. Then you look at the evidence on the ground. Some months ago there was a Paris Peace Summit to discuss peace in the Middle East. 70 countries came together. Only two peoples weren't represented, the Israelis and the Palestinians. What were they doing at the time? While all these 70 countries were having their photo opportunity on the nice lawn outside their hotel, these two countries were sitting down side by side, signing an agreement on water distribution for the West Bank for the next 10 years.
Yeah, but the question I've asked you is, where is the evidence of the commitment to a two-state solution? I've been covering events in the Middle East for 30 plus years.
So then we've got two levels of evidence. Firstly, we've got the rhetoric, and secondly, we've got the evidence of agreements being signed.
What about on the ground? What's happening on the ground in terms of settlements in the West Bank?
How is that supporting a two-state solution? That will be part of the final agreement.
No, what final agreement?
Well, what do you think of these settlements which have been deemed illegal by the United Nations? What do you make?
Well, if we're talking about the United Nations, then we can go back to 1947.
Let me ask you what you think, Arya, about these settlements.
The Palestinians had a state. In 1947, the United Nations created a Palestinian state. And what happened to that? It was rejected. It was rejected by the Palestinians. It was rejected by the Arab nations.
They didn't like the deal. They didn't think it was a fair deal.
I mean, if we're talking about the United Nations, we can either pick and choose which United Nations
we're talking about
we want
the
to listen
United
to.
Nations.
All right. Well, I'm asking you about illegal settlements. What do you think about them?
The settlements, as
because it's taking over little bits here, and here of the West Bank.
So I think there is a lot of different rhetoric about the settlements. The largest settlements, it is widely acknowledged, will become part of Israel in land swaps in a final stage negotiation. That is widely agreed and has been...
Widely agreed by whom?
including by statements by President Abbas
anything
of the
official
Palestinian
on
Authority.
paper, anything official on paper, anything that's
There's
been
no
signed.
peace agreement officially on paper.
Well,
which
thanks
is a
to you
shame.
and thanks to the continuous practices of the Israeli, government.
But it's a funny old situation, isn't it, where you take something from somebody and say, I'll give it back to you if you give us something else. And that's effectively what you're saying, isn't it? Part of a land swap deal. But in fact, this land's been taken illegally. And until that stops...
It was taken as part of a conflict. It was taken as part of a war.
Well, no, but it's still happening. It's still happening, Harry, isn't it?
The green line, the security barrier hasn't changed.
But do you remember when Joe Biden went to Israel? And Netanyahu announced that there were going to be more building on the day that Joe Biden arrived. And Joe Biden was furious about this because he was going against the policy. Well, it certainly happened in other areas around
on the one hand, you're negating the rhetoric that he's standing up there saying that he's committed to a two-state solution. On the other hand, if he says something else, then you're going to listen to that.
I'm wondering, Yasmin,
there needs to be consistency.
What would you need to see, in concrete terms, in your opinion, from people like Benjamin Netanyahu and the international community to make you believe that a two-state solution was likely?
Well, certainly less rhetoric and more practice on the ground. Because what I've been seeing since the day I was born was basically anything but a path towards peace, anything but a path towards an independent Palestinian state. I need to see Israel being truly committed to seeing an independent and sovereign Palestinian state by dismantling something like the apartheid wall, which is built in the West Bank on illegally appropriated Palestinian lands.
Do you not need to see the Palestinian Authority
Can I finish my point?
Just Israel.
I did not interrupt you, so please.
You did, but
I didn't interrupt you. I need to see Israel immediately put a halt to the illegal settlements in the West Bank and to also dismantle all the illegal settlements in the West Bank that have been built since 1967. And I need to see Israel end its blockade on Gaza and its illegally implemented blockade on Gaza, which has been going for 11 years now. Without these things, without seeing Israel also stop building settlements in East Jerusalem and respect the rights of Muslims and Christian Palestinians who live in the city, then I will never be...
So we know what you would like to see. I'm going to broaden it in just a minute, Peter, if I may, to the things that we mentioned at the very beginning. But Ari, let me ask you this. Sir Mick Davis, who is, I believe, chairman of the Jewish Leadership Council. Former chairman. Well, certainly was when he said this. The demand that Britain apologise for Balfour is a demand that Israel apologise for existing. Is that the way you see it?
The Balfour Declaration was the first paving stone towards Israel existing. It wasn't the final paving stone. It wasn't the only thing that brought about Israel's existence, but it was the first paving stone. If you have to apologise for building foundations after you've built a house, then essentially you're apologising for your house existing. It's the same analogy. But I would just say to Yasmin that you clearly, in your rhetoric, to use the same phrase just now, we're asking for a lot of things from Israel. At no point did you mention the Egyptian naval ships involved in the blockade, the naval barrier towards Gaza. You didn't mention the fact that until very recently, and it's only just been opened, the crossing into Egypt was also closed. It's this double standard that people are holding Israel to and not holding Egypt to. On the same account, at no point did you mention the Palestinian Authority and over 60 schools being named after terrorists, widely recognised terrorists. There's no argument about that. People who have gone in and blown up civilians. And schools are being named after them. This is where children are going to. This is photos of the terrorists are up on the wall. This is an endemic problem within the Palestinian Authority.
Sorry, Yasmin, can I just bring Peter in on this? I mean, I've been covering these events for 30 plus years. You've been studying them presumably for a great deal longer than that. And I can recall standing with a veteran correspondent and he's saying, I watched those children's grandparents throwing stones, and I'll be watching those children when they are grandparents and their grandchildren throwing stones. It's intractable. And it all goes back to the way the Western countries have viewed the Middle East as their playground in so many ways. Simple as that? Screwed it up most times?
Empires. Empires, and the British Empire in 1917 was still just the world's greatest power, just. And if you look at Britain in the 18th, 19th century, with our allies, we always negotiated with our allies concerning division of unexplored territories or the Middle East or whatever it was. And of course, before the First World War, you had the whole question of oil began to emerge too. So as you've seen with Sykes-Picot and everything else, it was standard empire policy to divide these places up beforehand.
Can I ask you this? I mean, it was done, as you're suggesting, with self-interest in mind in that particular, but perhaps with conscience in mind when it came to the foundation of the State of Israel. But again, that is in self-interest, to make you feel better. Was it done in any way to help either the Jewish people long-term or the Palestinian people long-term?
I think, in general, you'd say, as far as the decision makers like Balfour and Lord George in 1917, they had little, if no regard, really, for the significance of the Arab population or the Arab, any population, Jewish or Arab population in the region. That was not their interest. Their interest, in terms of the Balfour Declaration, was to win the war. And I think Balfour and Lord George and Curzon and the other members of the War Cabinet, they certainly had a sort of historic, they had a sympathy, they had a sense of sympathy for the Jewish predicament. Lord George and Balfour, born in the 19th century, they were already adults when the pogroms and everything started in the 1880s. So that was part of their mental, political framework as they went through.
I'd like to end, if I may, Peter, in just a moment, because we're running short of time, with our two guests from the opposite sides of the table and the opposite side of the argument, if I may, by asking you both the same question. Do you, as a representative here at this table of the Palestinian people, and you as a representative of the Jewish people, or Israel, at this particular table, do you feel that you will always be portrayed as victims in this? Come to you in a minute, Ari, if I may.
Victims.
Are you viewed as victims? And isn't that a terrible situation to be in?
I will always be a victim, of course.
But do the Palestinians think of themselves as victims?
No, we don't. We are the right owners of the land. This conflict is one of the most, it's one of the strongest conflicts in terms of justice, a conflict and a fight for justice in the world, a struggle for justice, for humanity. Anyone who supports the Palestinian right to free, the Palestinian people's right to freedom supports justice throughout the world. It's a fight that we lead for humanity. It's not just about the Palestinians. It's about humanity. It's about peace for everyone. We believe, as a Palestinian, living here in the UK, I have always been regarded as a victim. When someone asks me, why I don't go back to Palestine or to Gaza during Christmas, for example, where do I begin in explaining to them that I'm not allowed by Israel to go back, even though I'm not on some blacklist or anything? It's just because Gaza, the borders with Gaza are closed.
Do you feel that the whole world is against Israel when it comes to this sort of thing?
No, absolutely not. And there's been a recent public opinion poll of British public opinion which shows that opinion is very much split. If anything, it is moving more in favour of Israel within British public opinion. I'm an optimist. I truly believe that there will be peace. I see it in our lifetime. I think what it needs is people to come together and to talk. And when you have a refusal to come, even step into the negotiating table, that's when the violence accentuates itself. When you have people coming together, sitting around the table without preconditions, rejecting violence and rejecting calls for violence and rejecting support for terrorism, that's when we have a real potential for peace in the future.
But the problem is we've had accords before Oslo. We've had accords. We've had the leader of Israel and the leader of the Palestinian Authority shaking hands and saying it's all sorted. And how long ago was that? Almost 25 years ago.
20.
No one said it's all sorted. It was a step. And it was a step that created, for example, the Waqf Authority over Temple Mount, over the Al-Aqsa compound. There have been small steps taken. Rawabi was a small step taken for peace, for a future peace. But those small steps need to continue, and every time they stagnate and every time they're allowed to stop, we see an increase in violence, we see an increase in terrorism, and we see a decrease in calls for peace. And that's what we need to be striving towards. We need to be striving towards both leaderships, at least having the rhetoric calling for peace.
Yeah, OK, well, thank you all very much indeed. It's rushed by, and I didn't expect it to be an easy discussion, come from different sides. And water will be spilt, as we saw then. One state, two state, terrible state. I think we would all agree that it is still at this particular moment. No conclusions reached, but perhaps one of the things that needs to be taken out of this, in my opinion, is it's not so much for the outside world to try and impose its solutions on the region. We've seen that, and it hasn't always worked, but perhaps it's for the two sides themselves to understand that neither side is going away and they have to live together. Maybe that day will come. From me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, thank you very much for watching. Thank you to my guests. We hope to see you next time. Bye-bye for now.